If you think your HOA can walk onto a man's property, steal heat from his home in the middle of a January freeze, and smile while doing it, you better pray that man doesn't understand utility law. The first thing I saw that morning was steam rolling off the clubhouse roof across the lake. Thick white clouds pushing into the gray winter sky, while freezing rain tapped against the metal roof over my porch like somebody drumming nervous fingers. The second thing I saw was my propane gauge sitting just above empty. 30% gone overnight. I stood there in the cold with my coffee thermos in one hand, and the lake wind cutting through my flannel jacket hard enough to sting my ears. That tank had been filled 4 days earlier. 4. I remember staring at it while fog drifted low over the water behind my property line, trying to make the math work in my head. It didn't. My furnace barely ran at night. I lived alone. No guests. No leak smell. No pressure drop alarms. Just a disappearing fuel supply in the middle of the worst cold front Tennessee had seen in 8 years. Then I heard laughter across the shoreline. Music too. The HOA clubhouse sat maybe 200 yards down the muddy bank from my dock, glowing warm through giant glass windows while rain hammered the gravel parking lot around it. Pickup trucks lined the drive. Somebody was throwing a winter wine mixer during a freeze warning. I should have ignored it. Instead, I grabbed my coat and walked down toward the shoreline. Wet cedar smell rolled off the trees. Mud sucked at my boots near the fishing dock behind the clubhouse. That's when I saw the hose. Black industrial propane line running from the back tree line straight under the maintenance fence toward the clubhouse generator cage. My line. My fuel. I just stood there for a second listening to rain hit aluminum gutters while the realization settled into my chest slow and ugly. Somebody behind that building had tapped directly into my private reserve tank. Then the clubhouse door swung open and Celeste Whitmore stepped outside, holding a wine glass like she was hosting a damn fundraiser instead of committing utility theft. Camel-colored coat. Blonde hair perfectly set. That polished HOA smile already waiting on her face before she even spoke. "Grant," she said softly, almost amused. "You really shouldn't wander around maintenance areas during weather emergencies." I looked at the hose disappearing beneath the fence. That line runs to my tank. She took a slow sip of wine. Didn't even bother denying it. The community heating system failed yesterday afternoon. Families were getting nervous. We had to make temporary accommodations. Temporary accommodations. I actually laughed once at that. Calm. Quiet. You stole propane from my property. Her smile tightened just a little. Tiny crack. Watch your tone. Rainwater dripped off the clubhouse awning behind her while muffled music floated through the doors. Somebody inside cheered over a football game. Heat pouring from vents powered by my fuel. The board voted unanimously, she continued. Emergency authority clauses give us flexibility during severe weather events. I stared at her for 3 full seconds. You don't have authority over my tank. Celeste stepped closer, lowering her voice like we were sharing some private wisdom. Grant, do you really want to be the man who shut off heat during a freeze advisory? There it was. Not legal pressure. Social pressure. Public shame. HOA politics wrapped in fake concern. Across the parking lot, I noticed 2 residents watching us through the clubhouse windows. One of them slowly pulled the curtain back farther. Celeste knew exactly what she was doing. Building witnesses. Building narrative. I looked past her toward the warm lights inside, while freezing rain soaked through my jacket collar. How long? I asked. She tilted her head. Long enough to keep this neighborhood functioning. My stomach tightened. Long enough meant this wasn't panic theft. This was planned. Coordinated. Ongoing. Somewhere behind us, thunder rolled low across the lake, and the wind pushed harder through the cedar trees lining the shoreline. Celeste lifted her glass slightly. Honestly, Grant, if you were more community-minded, none of this would have become unpleasant. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. She didn't think she got caught. She thought she'd won already. And standing there in the freezing rain watching steam rise off that clubhouse roof, while my own fuel burned through their party heaters, I realized something that made this whole situation a lot worse for her than she understood yet. Because 2 winters ago, before I retired from commercial HVAC work, I upgraded that propane system myself. And every gallon pulled from that tank left a digital usage trail. Before I tell you what happened next, comment below with your city and let me know if your HOA has ever tried pulling something this insane, Because what Celeste Whitmore did over the next 72 hours turned a neighborhood power trip into a county-level disaster. I barely slept that night. Wind kept rattling the old metal weather vane above my workshop while sleet tapped against the windows hard enough to sound like somebody throwing gravel at the house. Around 3 in the morning I got up, pulled on my boots, and walked out to the propane tank with a flashlight cutting through freezing fog rolling off the lake. Another 6% gone. My breath hung white in the air while I stared at the digital monitor mounted beside the regulator housing. The usage spikes came in clean intervals every 43 minutes like clockwork. Commercial draw patterns. Not residential. Not accidental. Somebody at that clubhouse was cycling industrial heaters off my reserve line while pretending it was a community emergency. I remember standing there in the cold, feeling something shift inside me. Up until then, I had still been trying to convince myself this was temporary stupidity, misjudgment, panic management. But no, this was organized theft wrapped in HOA language and social pressure. And the worst part was how comfortable Celeste looked doing it. By sunrise, freezing rain had turned the gravel driveways around the lake into gray slush. Pickup trucks crawled past my property slower than usual, while neighbors avoided looking directly at my house. That told me she had already started talking. Small towns always leak gossip faster than water through cracked pipe joints. Around 8:30, I drove into Bell County for breakfast at a diner near the courthouse square. Same place I had eaten every Thursday for almost 12 years. The kind with fogged windows, burnt coffee, and old farmers arguing quietly over weather reports. But that morning the room felt different when I walked in. Conversations lowered. 2 men near the counter stopped talking completely. A woman I recognized from the HOA gardening committee suddenly found her pancakes fascinating. Social isolation. Celeste was fast. I took my coffee to a booth near the rain-streaked window and checked the propane monitoring app again. Another draw spike. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered and heard Celeste immediately. Calm. Smooth. Controlled. Grant, several residents are concerned about your attitude last night. I looked out toward the courthouse steps disappearing behind cold fog. My attitude. People are frightened. There are children in this neighborhood. There it was again. Manufactured morality. I kept my voice level. You ran a private line into my reserve system without authorization. Silence for half a beat. Then softer. More dangerous. I think you should be careful making accusations you cannot prove. I actually smiled at that because she still did not know about the digital tracking logs. Good thing I can prove them. That changed her breathing immediately. Tiny shift. Tiny crack. Grant, she said carefully now. Nobody wants this to become unpleasant. Too late for that. After breakfast, I drove back along the lake road while low clouds pressed down so hard over the water it looked like the shoreline itself was sinking. Halfway home, I noticed 3 HOA maintenance trucks parked behind the clubhouse. Engines idling. Men standing outside smoking beside the generator cage where the illegal line disappeared underground. One of them looked at my truck and immediately turned away. Another reached for his phone. Coordinated. Somebody had warned them. I kept driving without slowing down, but my pulse had started climbing now. Not panic. Recognition. I had seen this kind of behavior before on commercial contract disputes. Everybody acts confident until documentation enters the room. Then people start protecting themselves. Around noon, I got my first real surprise. There was an envelope taped to my front door under the porch light. No stamp. No mailing label. Just my name written across the front in black marker. Inside was a single folded invoice from a propane supplier in Knoxville dated 11 months earlier. One line highlighted yellow. Emergency Community Heating Transfer Authorization. My address. My property parcel number. And somebody had signed my name at the bottom. Badly. I sat at my kitchen table for almost 10 minutes, just staring at that invoice while sleet hissed against the windows and cold lake wind rattled the gutters overhead. The signature was close enough to mine to fool somebody skimming paperwork fast, but not close enough to survive real scrutiny. Whoever signed it had copied the shape of my name without understanding how I actually wrote. Too careful on the capital G, too stiff on the final R. The kind of fake signature made by somebody used to signing forms for other people. My coffee had gone cold beside me before I finally reached for my phone and called the propane supplier listed on the invoice. The woman who answered sounded exhausted before I even finished introducing myself. You are the 3rd person from that neighborhood to call this week, she said quietly. That made me sit up straighter. Third person, small pause. Keyboard clicking in the background. Mr. Mercer, I probably should not say more over the phone. Not denial. Fear. Corporate fear. The kind that starts after lawyers get involved. Outside my kitchen window, fog drifted low across the lake, while somebody's pickup truck crawled slowly past my gravel driveway for the second time that morning. Watching. Word was spreading now. I could feel it moving through the neighborhood like pressure building inside old pipes before a rupture. The woman lowered her voice. Sir, did you personally authorize emergency fuel diversion to Belhaven Shores Community Association? No, silence again. Then softer. That is what I thought. She gave me the name of a regional compliance supervisor in Knoxville and told me to ask specifically about transfer manifests tied to commercial redistribution permits. Commercial redistribution. My stomach tightened at those words because homeowners associations were not supposed to reroute propane reserves without state-level authorization, especially during freeze conditions. Too much liability. Too much risk. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there listening to rain drum against the metal roof over my workshop. Somewhere out on the shoreline, a buoy bell clanged hollow through the fog. Slow. Lonely. The kind of sound that makes everything feel farther away than it is. Around noon, somebody knocked on my front door. Not aggressive, just quick nervous taps. When I opened it, I found Donna Avery from 3 houses down standing there wrapped in a red raincoat with her arms folded tight against the cold. She looked over her shoulder before speaking. People are saying you threatened to shut off heat to the clubhouse. There it was. Celeste had moved faster than I expected. I stepped aside and let Donna into the mudroom, where the air smelled faintly like cedar and machine oil from the workshop next door. I never threatened anybody, I said. Donna hesitated. I know that. Emotional shift. First crack in the public narrative. She lowered her voice further. But Celeste told residents you were becoming unstable about property boundaries. I almost laughed at that. Property boundaries. As if siphoning fuel through illegal lines was some minor misunderstanding over fence posts. Donna rubbed her hands together nervously. Grant, there is something else. She told me maintenance crews had been working behind the clubhouse at night for nearly 6 months. Trucks arriving after midnight. Portable heaters being unloaded. Cash payments. No invoices posted to HOA records. And 2 board members had quietly resigned before Thanksgiving. Nobody knew why because Celeste called it personal burnout. But now residents were starting to ask questions. Not publicly yet. Quietly. In kitchens. At church parking lots. At the diner near the courthouse. Doubt was spreading. And doubt inside an HOA is like smoke inside walls. By the time people smell it, the damage is already moving underneath everything. After Donna left, I drove down toward the marina side of the neighborhood where the maintenance sheds sat near the muddy shoreline behind the clubhouse. Rain had slowed to a cold mist now. Gray water slapped softly against empty fishing docks while wind pushed fog low across the lake hard enough to erase half the shoreline. I parked beside the generator cage and killed the engine. No workers. No trucks. Just silence and the hum of industrial heaters somewhere inside the building. Then I noticed fresh boot prints in the mud leading behind the propane transfer housing. Somebody had removed the serial number plate off the regulator assembly. Deliberately. And suddenly this stopped looking like desperate winter theft. This started looking like cover-up. The temperature dropped to 11 degrees that night, and Belhaven Shores went strangely quiet. No kids outside. No golf carts buzzing around the cul-de-sacs. Just freezing wind pushing across the lake and rainwater dripping from pine branches onto frozen gravel. I sat in my workshop with the overhead lights off, listening to weather alerts crackle through an old radio, while the propane monitoring screen glowed pale blue beside my tool bench. Another draw spike hit at 1:17 in the morning, then another at 2:02. Whoever rigged that transfer line was getting desperate now. They were pulling fuel harder and faster than before. I leaned back slowly in my chair, exhaustion finally settling into my bones. Not anger anymore. Something colder. I kept thinking about my late wife standing in this same workshop years earlier, helping me paint the cabinets after we bought the property. Back before Belhaven became one more HOA kingdom run by people who confused authority with ownership. That tank was not just utility infrastructure to me. I installed it with my own hands after a tornado knocked out County Power one winter and left half the shoreline freezing for 3 days. I built redundancy because I believed preparedness mattered. Now some woman in cashmere coats was draining it to protect her image at cocktail parties. Around sunrise, I drove toward the county marina because I needed air that did not smell like tension. Fog rolled thick across the water while old fishing docks groaned under light ice buildup. A sheriff deputy truck sat near the boat launch with its engine running. Deputy Alan Pierce stepped out when he saw me pull in. Mid-50s. Good man. Quiet eyes. We had known each other casually for years through county contracting work. He held up a paper cup of coffee and gave me a look somewhere between concern and warning. "You are becoming popular this week," he said. I leaned against my truck door. "That bad?" Alan exhaled slowly into the cold air. "Celeste filed a community welfare complaint yesterday afternoon." I stared at him. "Against me? Claims you are threatening essential services during an active freeze advisory." There it was. Institutional pressure now. Not enough evidence for legal action, but enough to start building official narratives. Alan lowered his voice. "Off the record?" It felt rehearsed. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills while freezing mist drifted across the shoreline behind him. She also brought an attorney. That got my attention. "Who?" "Guy named Victor Hale. Knoxville firm. Expensive coat." Talked like he was already preparing liability language. Liability. Not theft denial. Not misunderstanding. Liability management. Important difference. Alan studied my face carefully. "Grant, what exactly is going on over there?" I looked out across the fog-covered lake for a long moment before answering. Somebody forged authorization documents and rerouted propane infrastructure onto HOA property. His jaw tightened immediately. No dramatics. Just instant recognition of how serious that sounded. "You got proof. Enough to make people nervous." Alan nodded once. "Then document everything before they start cleaning house." That phrase stayed with me all morning. Cleaning house. Because when I got back into Belhaven Shores around 10:30, I saw exactly what he meant. Two maintenance workers were replacing sections of fence behind the clubhouse. Fresh gravel covered the muddy ground near the generator cage where I had seen boot prints the day before. Somebody was actively erasing physical evidence. Worse than that, residents were watching me now. Curtains moved when my truck passed. People standing near mailboxes suddenly stopped talking. One older man actually turned and walked back inside his house the moment our eyes met. Fear had entered the neighborhood. Not fear of me. Fear of being attached to whatever this was becoming. Then my phone buzzed again. Text message from an unknown number. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. "Check the emergency board meeting agenda before tonight." I pulled over beside the empty tennis courts near the clubhouse and opened the HOA resident portal on my phone. The meeting agenda had only 3 items listed. Winter operations review. Emergency resource stabilization. Special assessment authorization. My stomach dropped the second I saw the projected amount beside the proposal. $480,000. By 6 that evening, freezing rain had turned Belhaven Shores into a gray reflection of itself. Streetlights shimmered across wet pavement. Wind pushed hard off the lake, rattling mailbox posts and bending the pine trees along the shoreline enough to make them creak like old docks under strain. I sat in my truck outside the clubhouse for almost 5 minutes before going in, watching residents hurry through the rain with their coats pulled tight around them. Nobody lingered outside anymore. Nobody smiled. The entire neighborhood felt tense now, like everybody sensed something ugly moving underneath the surface, but nobody wanted to say it first. Inside, the clubhouse smelled like damp wool, coffee, and overheated air. Folding chairs filled the main hall, and almost every seat was occupied. Celeste stood near the front beneath recessed lighting, perfectly composed in a cream-colored blazer, while soft jazz played through ceiling speakers like this was a charity auction instead of a financial ambush. Victor Hale stood beside her holding a leather folder against his chest. Expensive watch. Expensive haircut. The kind of attorney who billed by the quarter hour and never raised his voice because he expected rooms to bend around him naturally. Conversations lowered the second I walked in. You could feel it happen. Eyes tracking me. People pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Social pressure had fully matured now. Celeste gave me one brief glance and smiled with that same polished expression she used before issuing fines. Controlled. Superior. Calm enough to make other people doubt themselves. "Thank you all for coming during difficult weather conditions," she began once everyone settled. Her voice flowed smoothly through the room while rain hammered softly against the clubhouse windows overlooking the lake. As many of you know, Belhaven Shores has experienced unexpected infrastructure instability tied to emergency heating continuity. Infrastructure instability, not theft, not forged authorization forms. Language mattered to people like Celeste. The cleaner the words, the dirtier the reality usually was underneath them. She clicked a remote and financial projections appeared on a screen behind her. Emergency reserve depletion, heating stabilization costs, temporary utility preservation measures. Then came the number again, $480,000. A wave of low murmuring rolled across the room immediately. One older couple near the back actually looked sick. Victor Hale stepped forward calmly. The board is recommending a temporary special assessment to protect community safety and property values. Property values. There it was. The real religion of every HOA. A man near the front raised his hand slowly. What exactly failed? Victor answered before Celeste could. Certain private utility arrangements became unexpectedly unavailable. I almost laughed out loud hearing that. Unexpectedly unavailable. Like somebody accidentally misplaced a propane tank instead of illegally siphoning fuel through unauthorized transfer lines for months. Then Celeste shifted the room exactly where she wanted it. Unfortunately, she said gently, some residents have chosen confrontation over cooperation during this emergency. Heads turned toward me instantly. There was the public trial. Clean, subtle, designed to isolate me without saying my name directly. But something had changed since yesterday. People were not nodding anymore. They were confused, nervous. A few residents exchanged glances instead of immediately agreeing with her. Doubt was spreading faster now. Then an older resident named Martin Keller stood up near the side wall. Retired electrician. Quiet man. Lived here longer than almost anybody. Question, he said carefully. Why are maintenance records missing from November through January? The room went dead silent. Celeste blinked once. Tiny pause. Victor stepped in smoothly. Certain files are under active review. Martin did not sit down. By who? Another silence. Longer this time. I watched the room shift in real time. Not toward me yet, but away from her. Important difference. Celeste smiled again, but the edges were tightening now. Emotional cracks finally beginning to show through the polish. Martin, she said softly, this is not the time for speculation. He stared at her for another second before sitting down slowly. Fear still existed, but obedience had weakened. Then my phone buzzed inside my coat pocket. Another unknown number. One photo attachment. I opened it under the table and felt my heartbeat slow instantly. It was a picture of the clubhouse boiler room taken 3 nights earlier. Clear as daylight. Industrial transfer valves. Unauthorized propane splitters. And Celeste Whitmore herself standing beside the rerouted line. I did not react when I saw the photo. That surprised even me. 5 days earlier, I probably would have stormed across that clubhouse floor and shoved the image in Celeste Whitmore's face right there in front of everybody. But exhaustion changes people. So does clarity. Because standing in that overheated room while freezing rain battered the lake outside, I realized something important. Celeste was not fighting emotionally anymore. She was fighting procedurally, which meant the only way to beat her was to become more organized than she was. More patient, more dangerous. I locked my phone screen and slipped it back into my coat pocket without saying a word. Across the room, Celeste continued speaking smoothly about temporary hardship measures, while Victor Hale distributed assessment packets to residents already panicking over the projected costs. $480,000 divided across 92 homes during a freeze emergency. You could feel the fear moving through the room now. Quiet calculations. Retired couples staring at numbers they could not afford. Residents whispering under their breath. A younger man near the coffee station actually walked out halfway through the meeting without taking a packet. Celeste noticed it too. Tiny flicker in her expression. Control slipping 1 inch at a time. I left before the meeting ended and drove straight into Knoxville through freezing fog and black highway rain. Wipers dragging across the windshield. Thermos coffee gone bitter and cold beside me. Around midnight, I parked outside the regional propane compliance office in an industrial district near the river. Most of the building was dark except one office on the 2nd floor where fluorescent light glowed through half-closed blinds. Sandra Whitaker opened the door herself after I buzzed in. Mid-60s. Gray hair. Sharp eyes. Looked like somebody who had spent 30 years cleaning up expensive mistakes made by people with too much confidence. She barely glanced at the forged authorization form before her entire expression hardened. "That signature is fraudulent," she said immediately. No hesitation. No maybe. Just certainty. Rain hammered the metal roof overhead while she spread transfer manifests across her desk. "Mr. Mercer, this is worse than unauthorized diversion." She pointed to a sequence of fuel routing approvals tied to Belhaven shores over the last 11 months. Multiple emergency requests, temporary redistribution permits, commercial boiler declarations, every one attached to my property parcel, every one carrying forged authorization signatures. I felt physically cold hearing it laid out that cleanly. Not because of the money, because of the intent. This had been systematic, planned, repeated. Sandra slid another document across the desk. Insurance correspondence. "Do you know what happens if one of those transfer lines fails during active occupancy?" I shook my head slowly, even though part of me already knew. "Mass liability exposure," she said flatly. "If that clubhouse catches a carbon monoxide violation or suffers regulator failure, every insurance carrier involved starts looking for fraud immediately." There it was. The first real crack in the entire structure. Not just theft. Institutional exposure, corporate exposure, county exposure. Suddenly, this was no longer about one HOA president abusing authority. This was about forged infrastructure permits tied to occupied residential property during a declared freeze emergency. Sandra leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. "Have you disconnected them yet?" "No," she nodded once. "Respect. Good." I frowned slightly. "Good. Because if you shut them down now, they blame the outage on you. If inspectors witness active unauthorized diversion first, liability shifts entirely onto the association. Strategic counterattack, not emotional retaliation. That changed everything. Around 2 in the morning, I drove back toward Belhaven through cold mountain rain while 18-wheelers hissed past on wet asphalt. My anger had settled into something cleaner now. More controlled, more precise. When I reached the neighborhood entrance, the fog over the lake looked thick enough to swallow headlights whole. And through that fog, I could still see steam rising from the clubhouse roof. Still stealing heat. Still digging deeper. Good. Let them. The inspectors arrived Thursday morning, just after 8, while freezing fog still hung low across the lake, thick enough to blur the shoreline into gray shadows. 3 county vehicles rolled slowly through Belhaven shores with amber lights cutting through the mist, while residents watched from windows and front porches holding coffee mugs against their chests like people waiting for bad medical news. Nobody stopped the trucks. Nobody waved at Celeste anymore either. That part hit me harder than I expected. Fear had finally changed direction. I stood beside my workshop drinking burnt coffee from my thermos while rain tapped softly against the metal roof overhead. Sandra Whitaker stepped out of the lead vehicle wearing a heavy county-issued coat, with 2 propane compliance officers behind her carrying equipment cases through the slush. 10 minutes later, the fire marshal arrived too. Then another SUV from the insurance risk division. That one surprised even Sandra. Somebody moved fast, she muttered quietly beside me. Somebody had definitely moved fast. Word about forged permits tied to occupied residential property during a freeze emergency had apparently climbed higher than the HOA expected overnight. Across the lake, I could already see movement outside the clubhouse. Celeste emerged onto the back patio, speaking rapidly into her phone, while Victor Hale walked beside her with the stiff posture of a man mentally recalculating billable hours and liability exposure at the same time. The county vehicles parked directly beside the generator cage near the muddy shoreline, where the unauthorized transfer line disappeared underground. Residents started gathering almost immediately despite the cold. Quiet clusters near golf carts. Couples whispering under umbrellas. One woman actually pointed openly toward Celeste while talking to her husband. Public perception was collapsing now. Slowly. Irreversibly. I stayed back while inspectors worked because Sandra had warned me about one thing very clearly during the drive home from Knoxville. "Do not look emotional," she said. "The calmest person in the room usually owns the truth." So I stayed calm, even when the first raised voices started near the clubhouse maintenance doors. One compliance officer held up a disconnected regulator plate sealed inside an evidence bag, while another photographed the transfer assembly from 6 different angles. Then came the moment everything shifted permanently. The fire marshal walked out carrying a portable carbon monoxide detector and said one sentence loud enough for half the shoreline to hear. This entire setup was operating without emergency occupancy certification. Silence hit the neighborhood instantly. Heavy silence. The kind that makes people stop moving. Celeste stepped forward immediately, smile strained now around the edges. There seems to be confusion regarding temporary emergency authority procedures. Nobody answered her. Not even Victor. That was the part one remember most. The isolation. A week ago, residents would have nodded automatically at anything she said. Now people avoided eye contact with her entirely. Martin Keller stood near the mail kiosk with his arms crossed, staring openly at the inspection crew. Donna Avery whispered something to another resident, and both women looked toward Celeste with expressions that had finally shifted from fear into embarrassment. Social collapse inside an HOA happens quietly at first. Not dramatic. Just absence. People stop defending you. Stop agreeing. Stop pretending. Celeste felt it too. You could see it in the way her posture tightened every time another resident turned away from her. Then Sandra approached me near the shoreline holding a clipboard against her coat while freezing rain drifted sideways across the water. "Grant," she said evenly, "you were correct. This line has been active for months." Behind her, one of the county workers shut down the auxiliary transfer valve completely. Steam stopped rising from the clubhouse roof less than 2 minutes later. By Thursday night, Belhaven Shores felt less like a neighborhood and more like the waiting room outside a courtroom before a verdict. No music from the clubhouse. No golf carts. No cheerful porch lights reflecting off the lake. Just freezing fog pressing low across the shoreline while cold rain ticked against roofs and gutters all night long. The county shut down the unauthorized transfer line before sunset, and by 9:30 the clubhouse heating system started failing one section at a time. First the banquet hall, then the east corridor near the fitness room. By midnight the pipes inside the lower utility wing had frozen solid. I watched emergency maintenance trucks come and go through the fog while residents gathered in anxious little groups beneath umbrellas near the mail kiosks. Nobody looked angry anymore. Angry would have been easier for Celeste to manage. This was worse. This was public doubt turning into public blame. Around 10, I got another call from Deputy Alan Pierce. "You need to come down here," he said quietly. "County administration just suspended the entire HOA board pending investigation." I sat there in silence for a second listening to rain hit the metal roof above my workshop. Tonight. That moved faster than even I expected. When I reached the clubhouse parking lot 20 minutes later, sheriff vehicles were already there with hazard lights flashing through the fog. 2 county investigators stood near the entrance speaking with Victor Hale, while residents crowded beneath the covered walkway pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. Celeste stood off to the side near the stone landscaping wall wrapped in a long black coat. But something fundamental had changed in her posture now. The polish was gone. She kept trying to reassert control over conversations only for people to quietly drift away from her halfway through sentences. Emotional isolation had fully arrived. Nobody wanted to stand too close to the woman tied to forged permits, missing records, and an active county investigation. Inside the clubhouse, the air already felt colder. You could actually see people's breath near the lobby entrance. One of the investigators carried out 2 banker boxes full of HOA records while another photographed the maintenance office door seals. Residents watched in complete silence. No outrage. No speeches. Just the sound of rain and camera shutters. Then came the real collapse. Martin Keller stepped forward near the reception desk, holding a folded copy of the emergency assessment proposal. "Were you planning to charge us $500,000 to hide this?" he asked calmly. Not yelling. Calm was worse. Celeste immediately lifted her chin. The board acted in the community's best interest under emergency authority protections. Martin stared at her for 3 long seconds. "You forged documents using our homes as collateral." That sentence landed like thunder inside the room. Several residents physically stepped farther away from Celeste after hearing it. Donna Avery turned completely around and walked toward the sheriff instead. Victor Hale finally spoke for the first time in almost 10 minutes, but even he sounded exhausted now. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "I strongly recommend you stop making public statements. Public statements, not accusations, not misunderstandings. Damage control language. Celeste looked at him in disbelief, like betrayal had finally entered the room wearing an expensive suit. Then she saw me standing near the entrance beside Deputy Pierce. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rainwater dripped from the shoulders of my coat onto the tile floor, while freezing wind pushed through the opening doors behind me. Celeste tried one last smile, but it collapsed halfway across her face. "Grant," she said softly, "you could still help stabilize this situation." I looked past her toward the dark clubhouse windows where no steam rose anymore. "I already did," I said. The rain finally stopped 3 days later. Belhaven Shores sat under a heavy gray sky, while dirty snow melted slowly along the gravel driveways and muddy shoreline paths around the lake. The neighborhood looked exhausted. Not damaged physically so much as emotionally stripped down, like everybody had just survived something they were embarrassed to admit happened in the first place. County notices remained taped to the clubhouse doors. Temporary closure orders. Active investigation warnings. Insurance review notifications. The steam never came back to the roof after the transfer line was shut down. That image stayed with people. Cold windows where warm lights used to glow. Silence where authority used to speak confidently. By Monday morning, the county formally suspended all financial authority held by the HOA board pending fraud review. Victor Hale withdrew from representation 48 hours later after investigators subpoenaed communication records tied to the forged propane authorizations. 2 additional board members resigned through emailed statements blaming procedural misunderstandings. Nobody believed them. Celeste Whitmore tried staying visible the first couple days, walking the neighborhood with that same stiff posture and polished smile she always used during inspections. But social gravity had turned against her completely now. Residents stopped engaging. People crossed streets instead of greeting her. Conversations died the second she approached. One afternoon, I watched her standing alone outside the mailbox pavilion while 2 women from the gardening committee quietly walked away mid-conversation without even pretending to hide it. That was the real punishment in the end. Not the investigation. Not the lawyers. Isolation. The collapse of social authority she spent years building through fear and manipulation. Around the same time, Sandra Whitaker confirmed something else that finally explained the missing money. Belhaven Shores had been operating at a massive budget deficit for nearly 14 months. Emergency heating repairs were delayed repeatedly because reserve funds had already been burned covering landscaping overruns, legal disputes, and private contractor agreements approved directly by Celeste without full disclosure. The propane diversion was never temporary panic management. It was financial concealment disguised as emergency leadership. She gambled that nobody would challenge her during winter. She gambled wrong. 2 weeks later, I got full legal control back over my propane infrastructure after county inspectors certified the system safe and independent again. The morning they removed the final evidence seal from my tank, fog drifted quietly over the lake, while cold sunlight finally broke through the clouds for the first time in days. I stood beside the regulator housing with my hands in my coat pockets, listening to geese move across the water somewhere beyond the shoreline. Peaceful. Quiet. Mine again. That mattered more than I expected, because somewhere along the way this stopped being about propane. It became about dignity. About watching somebody slowly convince an entire community that rules only existed for other people until reality finally answered back harder than any argument ever could. A month after the investigation started, Celeste sold her house quietly through a private listing and left Belhaven Shores before sunrise during another cold rainstorm. No goodbye post. No final meeting. Just moving trucks rolling through wet streets while curtains shifted behind windows all over the neighborhood. Nobody came outside to help her. Nobody stopped her either. That silence said everything. These days my workshop smells like cedar dust and machine oil again instead of stress. The old weather vane still rattles when storms roll across the lake, but now it just sounds like weather instead of warning. Sometimes neighbors stop by with coffee and ask how I knew the transfer records would expose everything. Truth is, I did not know for certain. I just understood something people like Celeste never do. The moment you start believing control matters more than integrity, every shortcut you take becomes evidence waiting for daylight. Belhaven learned that lesson the hard way. So did I. Never surrender your property rights just because somebody speaks confidently. Never mistake polished authority for actual truth. And never underestimate how fast public power collapses once fear stops protecting it. Looking back now, the satisfaction was not watching her lose control. It was watching the community slowly recover the courage to stop pretending she deserved it in the first place. Last week, I reopened the old side gate leading down toward my fishing dock for the first time since the investigation started. Fog rolled low across the shoreline, while cold morning air carried the smell of wet cedar off the trees. I stood there listening to water tap gently against the pilings and realized something that finally let me sleep again. Heat can be stolen. Money can be forged. Authority can be abused. But eventually the truth leaves its own trail. And when it does, even the warmest clubhouse in the neighborhood cannot protect the people hiding inside it. If you made it this far, rank the story from 10 to 0. I would love to know what you think.